Hello everyone. I'm Tanya from Leaders Flint, and I will be your host for today's episodes, Careers in Investment Banking. If you're new, welcome to our Career Insight series, where in each episode, we aim to explore a different sector of the Canadian business industry. For other resources, check out Leaders Flint on Instagram, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more informative interviews. Now, I will welcome our guest, Mr. Christopher Tuszynski, who is an investment banking analyst.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Christopher. So we'll get started then. The first question we have for you is, where does your story begin, or how does your story start?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's relevant to just go back maybe to high school even. My name's Chris. Obviously, born and raised in Toronto, Canada. Spent basically my whole life here. I went to high school at St. Mike's, which is in Toronto. It's sort of like a private school focused on athletics. So played a wide variety of sports when I was in high school, and really didn't take a keen focus until in academics until maybe grade 11, grade 12. I played really high level soccer, and so a lot of my focus was on that throughout high school. And I think, just through pursuing, professional athletic career and ultimately not having it turn out the way I'd like, I ended up attending Queen's University to study economics and finance there. At Queen's, I got accepted into a pretty prestigious investment club called Limestone Capital. And really, to be honest, to this day, I don't even really know how I got in. I didn't know a ton about business or anything. And I think the team there just kind of took a risk on me. And, I was fortunate enough to be selected. And through getting into an organization like that, you're kind of exposed to the different career paths that are available to you in finance, whether it be banking, consulting, accounting, all these different things. And for me, with my economic background, much more cerebral, big picture thinker, the idea of transactions and working on M&A deals and things like that were really interesting to me. So I decided to pursue investment banking as a career path. I started off by doing an internship on the buy side because kind of my core passion in finance was the investment side of the business. So I interned at a teacher's pension plan in private equity, and then upon graduation, joined a boutique M&A advisory firm called Validtas Capital. So it was my kind of first foray into investment banking. And the thought process there, as opposed to going to call it like a larger big six investment bank or a US investment bank, was, I come from an entrepreneurial background. Both my parents were entrepreneurs. And so I had that like entrepreneurial drive kind of burned in me. And Validtas was a really small firm, but it had some pretty heavy hitting seniors. So the founding partner, Paris Hayden, was former Morgan Stanley, Credit Suisse, and then the other founding partner, Boris Nemansky, was former CIBC. And so I felt like I could learn a lot from them, but they were also trying to build a business and innovate on the industry and think a little bit outside the box. And that was something that I wasn't really hearing a lot from in my other interviews. So kind of took a gamble, went there, worked 2 years in the M&A group there, learned a ton, executed a wide variety of mandates, both on the financing side and on the M&A side. And ultimately, I think like the most unique part of that whole experience was, once I kind of got a feeling for how investment banking is going to be, I got to focus on other entrepreneurial things because ultimately we're trying to build a business, right? So I did everything from like doing marketing strategy to doing payroll stuff to taking on a lot of like leadership initiatives in our development programs for summer analysts, things like that. And all the way down to like even like helping paint the walls of our office and stuff. So it was a really cool experience. I think ultimately, I just wanted to go in a different direction than the firm. And I spoke to Paris, him and I, to this day, so he's the CEO. Like we maintain a really, really close relationship. And I just kind of wanted to test myself at a larger institution with a bigger platform and just sort of like push my creativity and see what I could do with more resources. And so, I was fortunate enough to meet the team at CIBC. Financial sponsors was much different than mergers and acquisitions. So on M&A, I learned like the technical and the modeling side. And I think in financial sponsors, I'm still learning obviously every day, but doing more like creative structuring and thinking outside the box. And I think we kind of use that technical skill, but applied in conventional ways. And I think that's something I really wanted to learn more of. And so, yeah, like I've been at CIBC now for almost 2 years, about a year and like 6-7 months or 8 months. I can't even remember. And yeah, it's been a great experience. I think I've worked on a lot of different things, and now actually as of Friday, fortunate enough to be awarded an associate position. So we'll be starting as an associate in January. So yeah, that's kind of my story.
Thank you very much for sharing. It was a very much inspirational story.
Thanks, no worries. It's I'd say like decently conventional, but like there's a lot. I think like for students that are looking to get in this business, there's a lot of things that I did that maybe not a lot of people do, but by the same token, like you hear queens and you hear athletics and stuff, it'll relate to kind of the conventional path, but hopefully we get into in the rest of the interview. But there's a lot of unconventional ways that I went about it.
Thank you. Thank you. The second question we have is, what is the biggest challenge you faced either as a student or an employee, and how did you overcome it?
I think like there's a wide variety of challenges that present themselves to you. I think like for me, ultimately the biggest challenge that I faced early on in my life, like I'd say kind of when I was deciding what career I wanted to pursue, which is probably what a lot of people listening today or listening in the future are going to want to know. So the biggest challenge for me in that whole process was like finding an identity as an individual. I think like a good portion of my life, the first 17, 18, 19 years of my life were very much aligned with the identity of a high level athlete. And so that comes with it things. So, sacrificing, not going out and having fun to get rest for games and training and stuff when your friends are doing other things. And then when I lost that professional athletics side or that high level athletics side, I found it very difficult to occupy my time with things. When you have a passion, for me, I was a soccer player. So that was my passion, taking up, I'd say, like a good 90% of my time. And when that was out of my life, I think I felt it was very challenging to find something that I was as passionate about to fill the rest of my day. And so there was definitely like a 2-year period, I'd say, from like first year until maybe midway through second year, where I really like struggled. I struggled to find like passion and motivation, and then ultimately like it affect my academic performance and a lot of other parts of my life. And, I was very lucky that honestly, I'll tell you, like I stumbled upon finance completely by accident. I was just reading these like 30-second like how to read a stock quote online, and I had no idea what I was doing. But what I liked about it was that it was new and it was interesting and it seemed exciting. And what that allowed me to do was kind of take all the skills that I learned in athletics and apply them to something new. It gave me like a reason to work hard again. And I think that was really challenging for me, that identity shift. So kind of going from the athletic side to now having the identity of, a financial professional. And once I was able to kind of like realign myself in that way, I think everything else was much easier. It was easier for me to get up early and do the extra studying and do the networking and all the stuff required to get a competitive job like banking, right? So that was probably the biggest challenge for me early on.
Thank you. That is amazing. The third question we have for you is, when networking with industry professionals, what is something you're looking to learn about specifically? That is problem-solving strategies, how to motivate a team.
So like, is that what we look for, or what the candidates should look for when they're networking?
Something you as a person, as an employer and a student.
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, and like I'm gonna answer it twofold, right? So,
Sure.
To relate to the students, let's say, or to the people that are trying to get these jobs, I think like one of the biggest things I always looked for when I was networking was the personality of the kind of the organization, right? Like, what's the culture? I think like a big thing that people don't realize when they're recruiting for these types of jobs, especially investment banking, is that as much as these banks and these people are trying to grill you and trying to like get to know who you are, and you kind of get lost in that competition, equally as much you are interviewing the bank. I can't tell you how many times where I was in networking events with firms that I thought were really interesting, and I met some people that just completely turned me the wrong way, whether it was because their values were misaligned from mine, or because just like I couldn't imagine myself working in the same room as them for a long period of time. I think like that's a big thing for students to understand, is that ultimately like there should be a fit on both sides, not just on the bank side. In terms of us, like as me as someone who's heavily involved in the recruiting process from a bank side, I think like what we look for is just a level of uniqueness. And I think that's a blanket term that I'll specify. If you think about it in terms of like a competitive, like these industries are competitive, right? Maybe there's like 40, 50 seats across, all of Bay Street. And I'll tell you, there's like thousands of people applying, maybe like 2,000 or something. So that the yields are pretty low. And furthermore, that's compounded by the fact that, nowadays, like everyone who applies to these roles is incredibly qualified. They go to top business schools, they have top grades, they have good extracurriculars, like good work experience, all these different things. And so even if you don't have those, or if you do, or if you find yourself in one of these networking events, like one of the things that we look for is just like your ability to stand out and be a little bit unique. Like I think everybody's going to have some degree of like roughly the same grades, roughly the same work experience, roughly the same passion, roughly the same work ethic. But for me, it's just all about like how you can stand out. And there's a couple different ways you can do it. What I did was I tried to just seem, and to be honest, it wasn't I tried to, I genuinely was. I was very interested. I had a genuine passion and a genuine interest, and I was occupying a lot of my time with this business. And so for me, talking to these professionals about different transactions or investment theses or things like that, like it was very easy for me to have a genuine connection with them because I was doing this already by myself. And the other thing is like just not trying too hard. I think ultimately, like if the fit is there on a personal and a professional basis, it's going to come out. Like you don't need to force it. Ultimately, like we're people too. Like I'll talk to half the candidates about, like what they do on the weekends, like what they find interesting outside of work. I think one of the biggest things that I want to communicate during this interview is just like this veil of finance and how you have to always be thinking about it. I think it's good to have a passion that you're always like trying to learn and always trying to get better. But for me, like we want to know the person behind, like outside of the office. Like I think like, for instance, some of the smartest people I've met in this business, like they have a lot of like passions and interests outside of banking. Like for me, it's history or other like, science, like other like theoretical thoughts of cooking. Like I think it's really just striving for excellence in everything you do. And that doesn't necessarily need to be in finance. And so what I try to do to be unique in some of these interviewings, networking events, when I was a candidate was just try to say, like they would ask me like, what do you do outside of work and stuff? And I'd say, yeah, I used to play sports, blah, 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 all this stuff. And then like, yeah, I spend my weekends trying to perfect like, high level French cuisine or whatever it may be at the time. And I think that's important because what it allows you to do is it allows you to communicate your personality. You get your chance to communicate your business savviness in the interview. And I think what's harder for us to ascertain is who you are as a person. I think that's important. Probably the most important.
Thank you so much. That was so inspirational for me.
No worries.
The fourth question we have for you is, why did you get involved with this industry?
It's a good question. I ask myself it every day. No, I'm kidding. I think like to be transparent, like I've always been a numbers guy, and so that limited me to a few career paths. Finance was obviously the most alluring, just in terms of the prestige nature and all those different things, and that kind of like started my call it magnifying lens on the industry, and what like really like got me started in the career, and what got me really interested was just, honestly, it's the ability to learn multiple different things at an incredibly high level. And by high level, I mean like an incredibly elite level, not like you'll be a subject matter expert in multiple different things based on your day-to-day interactions, which for me, like, I think core to my entire being, like what I try to do every day is just get a little bit smarter, get a little bit better read on something. I love to read, love to learn. Like some people say like, oh, I love to learn, but they don't do anything about it. They just say it because they think they should. For me, like my dad is a historian. So like I grew up just like learning and reading all the time. Like instead of watching cartoons, I was watching the History Channel, all those different things. So like what really allured me about banking was this concept of that in the morning I could be, working on an oil and gas transaction, and I'd be like basically like a subject matter expert in oil and gas. And then at nighttime, I'm working on a technology transaction. So now I know all about like B2B SaaS and education technology, all these different things. And for me, that was fascinating. And honestly, I'll tell you, that's probably what keeps me in the job today, because, it's a really rewarding experience when you kind of walk around, or your family will ask you questions about like something, and you just have like such detailed and precise knowledge on it. I think it's a really unique skill, and it's something that I learned. I had it before, like I had the innate ability to be like that, but it's definitely been fostered in banking, and it's something that I hope I kind of keep for the rest of my life, because to me, like that's what it's all about. It's just knowing as much as you can and trying to constantly, if you find that stuff interesting, if you find the discovery process of learning interesting, I'd say this is definitely a career for you.
Thank you. What do your day-to-day responsibilities look like?
I think like it's best to answer that by saying the day-to-day is never a day-to-day. Like it's always a little bit different. I'd say I can like do my best to standardize the day as best I can. But the reality is that we work in a deal business. So deal businesses are highly volatile. And so like some weeks you'll work maybe like 40, 50, 60 hours. Another week you can work up to 100, right? Like it really just depends like what's going on in the group and what's going on with the files that you're on. But I'd say overall, and I'll tell you what it's like to kind of be an entry-level analyst and then what it's like to be more senior, kind of in my spot where you're at the associate level. But as an entry-level analyst, it really, again, depends on your group and it depends on what you're working on. But typically, I'll say like for the first 6 to 7 months, you're really just trying to like get a foothold in your career. You're really just trying to ramp up and learn the industry. So you'll get staffed on a few files. Your day kind of looks like getting into the office or getting onto your computer sometime around 9. I think when you start off, it's better to kind of maybe start around 8:30. But like for me nowadays, I kind of like get online 9:30, 10 anyway. So it just depends. But yeah, you usually spend the first, I call it like hour to 2 hours reading the news, following up on any of your coverage names, just making sure that you're kind of plugged into the M&A activity in your industry. And then after that, maybe spend like another like half hour kind of updating any databases and making sure that that like some of the things that the group track are in order. So some groups, like a real estate group, will have like a comparables list or a precedent transaction list. My group and financial sponsors, we maintain a coverage database of all the portfolio companies for various private equity firms that we cover. And so like I'll go through the M&A news and just make sure everything's like kind of up to date and I'm not missing anything. The other thing, like after that, after kind of like you kind of gone through emails and kind of got like the admin tasks, how we'll call it, then usually you spend like a majority of your day working on transaction related work. So that could be anything from pitching, doing financial modeling, writing confidential information memorandums, working on strategic analysis, like whatever it is. It could be for either a pitch or for a live transaction. Usually, I'd say it depends on the group, but for me, like we go into pitch mode. So like there'll be like months at a time where I don't do any pitches, and then there's, I'd say months at a time where I'm only doing pitches. It just depends. Some groups they only pitch, and some groups they only do deals. It really just depends. For me, I think one of the misconceptions is that pitching is bad. I think pitching actually can be quite fun, and the reason is because a lot of the financial analysis that people find interesting in this business tends to happen on pitches because you're trying to show creative scenarios. When you're working on a live transaction, typically the level of financial analysis you're doing is pretty rudimentary because the buyers, for instance, are already in the data room and they're already looking at the data themselves. So they're going to build their own financial models and things like that. Whereas like when you're pitching a company on a specific transaction, you want to show them the impacts and stuff. So anyway, I digress, but that's, I'd say like, maybe if you were to break up into buckets, you'd say like 20% is based on sort of like your group's sort of like database tracking. And then like 60 to 70% would be like transaction related work, and then call it like the remaining, whatever that is, 20% would be on just like administrative stuff and getting ahead of things, and honestly like general learning. So if you're like in the first year of your job, you're probably going to do what I said, and then that last 20% you're going to spend kind of like going through previous work and trying to get up to speed, like looking at an old pitch or an old transaction model or something like that, just to kind of learn the basics. If you're in my position, the last 20% is usually just spent making sure that all your deliverables are in order, that your team's operating efficiently and things like that. I think as you move more towards my level, where you're at the associate level, it becomes more managerial. So spend a lot more time like describing tasks and helping people kind of understand things, and then reviewing a lot of work. So like for me, I'd say probably 50-60% of what I do is reviewing work now. But I'd say when I started, it was doing it for sure. So it just depends.
Thank you. And what do you love about your job?
So I think like in banking, there's a lot of things to like and a lot of things not to like. Like a typical answer will be like people like working on deals and things like that. But I don't know, that's not like really what I find exciting. I think for me, what I love the most is the learning and the camaraderie with the team. Like I'm very lucky that I have a really strong team, and I really like the personalities of all the people I work for. So it makes it a lot easier to put in those harder hour weeks when you really care about the people that are working above you, and simultaneously they care about you, right? So I guess that goes more towards the culture at CIBC and the group that I'm in specifically. I think what I like about banking generally, like just overall, I think like it gives unprecedented learning opportunities, both if you want to stay in finance and if you want to leave it. Specifically, like I mentioned earlier, the ability to just become a subject matter expert on all these different things. And furthermore, like for me, like long-term career, like hope to be an entrepreneur one day. And then, so, you know, investment banking obviously has taught me, I'd say like a good, like 60% of some of the harder things that have to do as an entrepreneur, like capital plan, budgeting, forecasting, how to raise capital, how to, you know, do an acquisition, how to sell eventually, all these different, how to craft a message, even how to like market your strategy, how to kind of like get customers, and just basically how to like monitor your business overall. So I think like I love like the robust skill set that it gives you. And then specifically, I just love like the learning about random stuff, but that's very specific to my group because I work in an agnostic practice. So I'm in the financial sponsors groups. We work on tons of different industries. If you're like in a real estate group, obviously you'll work mostly on real estate. If you're in a tech group, you work mostly on tech, which is why those people tend to like those more than they like other industries, obviously. But yeah, like I'd say that's what I really love. It's just, the other thing I'd say is that I kind of love the, I do like the project-based nature of it because I like coming from athletics, I like the pressure and deadlines, and I kind of like how you have to think at critical moments, and that's something I really enjoy. And then finally, I'd say like in my current role, what I really, really enjoy probably the most overall is just the leadership and the mentorship aspects of it. So my group's really good about enabling kind of associate level people to lead, and even analysts, once they pass their first like year or two, are definitely able to lead. And so I really like that. I like kind of like developing people over time, working with people to get better, teaching and mentoring. It's a big passion of mine, hence why I'm here. So I think that's part of it. Part of what I love as well. A lot of those are unique to my position specifically, but I'd say the one that's more blanketed to banking would be just the subject matter expertise.
Thank you. That was so in-depth, and I was truly grateful for that.
Yeah, no problem.
The next question we have is, what is the best career decision you have ever made?
Oh, that's a great question. Some would argue that I've made none. No, I'm kidding. I think like for me, the best decision I ever made wasn't one decision. It was more of, maybe it was, who knows? I think like what it was really though for me was to trust myself to branch out and be different and be patient. I think maybe that was like kind of, and I guess like maybe some people who listen to this will relate. Like when you go to like a Western Ivy or a Queen's Commerce or one of the like any of the other top business programs, there's typically like one type of personality and one type of style and one type of almost like template individual that goes into this career path of investment banking. And what I kind of want to say is that there's definitely, that's just the reality of, I guess, what people think they need to do, but the reality of us that are actually on the other side, like there's so many different types of us. And I think for me, like one of the harder decisions I had to make and one of the best decisions I had to make, I think, was just to be a little bit different. When I was kind of not doing what a lot of the other people at Queen's Commerce are doing, for instance, to get into banking, I was definitely looked at like a little strange, but I think for me, it was the best decision for me. It allowed me to kind of develop on my own timeline. It allowed me to explore things that I thought were interesting. And ultimately, I think what it allowed me to be was very unique when it came to the recruiting process. And as I mentioned earlier, like being unique is like a good 75% of the battle. And so, yeah, I think like one of the best career decisions I think I ever made was to trust myself and to branch out and be unique. And then furthermore, to be patient. Like I think going to Valentine's Capital was one of the better decisions I ever made. I could have, you know, really stretched myself thin to go to a larger investment bank and get churned out in the first, you know, right out of school analyst class. However, I think going to a smaller firm and developing very unique skills allowed me to do a bunch of different things. So it allowed me to learn about entrepreneurship and what it takes to run a business. It also allowed me to get a lot more deal exposure earlier on in my career because I was at a boutique investment bank. And ultimately, when I was ready to make my move, I felt like I had matured a lot, both personally and professionally. And it put me in a really good position, I think, to kind of come to CIBC and make an impact. Whereas I think if I would have gone to CIBC right out of school, it may not have worked that way. So a little combination of things, but I think for me, it was a combination of kind of like, they're all kind of one decision that I made to be a little bit patient and to kind of be unique. And I think that kind of culminated my decision to go to Valentine's out of school. I think, yeah, probably one of the better career decisions I ever made.
Thank you, because the idea of uniqueness really resonates with me because
Yeah.
even during during the application processes, I'm currently applying to universities. The
Yeah.
idea, what recruiters are looking for are the characteristics, what makes you unique, what makes you stand out, what
Yeah.
makes you different.
For sure. And like, I think like that's just like any competitive process, right? Like even like for what we do, like once you are a banker, like if you're running an M&A process and you get a ton of different buyers, like still the company that you're selling is going to want to know what makes each buyer unique, like which one's the right fit. And I think it's just really, it's a numbers game of competition that people need to, I think, just generally be a little bit more comfortable being themselves. Cause I think individuality is what drives kind of success and long term. Like it's good to learn from other people and learn from past mistakes and sort of adapt. Like there's obviously certain things you wouldn't do, like when you're applying to university, being unique is not like, you know, getting terrible grades, right? Like you still need to have those, but yeah, it's like just exploring your own interests and your own individuality, and I think that's what's going to allow you to stand out. Like it starts in university applications and it goes all the way up until, you know, you get into a seat like mine and further.
Yeah, definitely. And can you talk about the most interesting project you worked on or the deal you've chosen?
There's been a couple that stand out for sure. I'll be cautious with names. There's a
Sure.
couple that have been announced. There's a couple that haven't. I think early on in my career, when I was at the boutique investment bank at Valtas, there was a few transactions that really stood out to me. One of them, we were basically tasked with being the in-house corporate development for a large public. What's the word for them? I guess they're like a food and beverage business. Like everyone would know them, but I can't say the names. The deal never got announced. But effectively, what we did was that we built them an acquisition pipeline, and we worked with them to do like pro forma modeling and things like that. And for me, like what really stood out was the fact that I was working basically like hand in hand with the CFO of this public company at like whatever
Wow.
I was at the time, like 24 years old, 23 years old, and he was calling me directly to my phone, and we were literally, you know, modeling out the impacts of these various acquisitions on the firm's go forward capital structure and on their reporting, and modeling pro forma EPS and all these different things. And you know, for me, it was the first time doing a merger model, and so kind of to have your first time doing such an important financial model with a C-suite executive for a public company, it was really cool. Really, really cool experience. Definitely not the biggest transaction I've ever worked on, but one of the most meaningful. My first ever transaction in finance was a SaaS deal that also got terminated without announcement. But that was really interesting as well, because probably the first time I spoke up in front of a room with people that were way older than me and provided some meaningful insight. And then I'll talk about one that was announced, because I'm sure everyone on the call that listens to this is going to want to hear about some sort of M&A deal that they can look up. So, you know, more recently, like in my group, we see a lot of PIPE transactions. They're called private investments in public equity. It's basically like when a financial sponsor, whether it be a private equity firm or some other investor, takes a big position in a public business. And these fascinate me for a number of reasons. Mostly because I've always been really interested in the stock market and the psychological aspects that it involves.
Me too.
But yeah, just to speak specifically about a transaction, my group advised on the Brookfield investment in Superior Plus. So Brookfield Asset Management invested, I think it was US 260 Canadian, $350 million in a business called Superior Plus, which is like a propane sort of like energy company, essentially. Like they have like propane distribution all across North America. And the coolest thing about the transaction for me wasn't really like what Superior Plus did. Like energy doesn't specifically interest me, but really what it is the structure of the transaction I find particularly interesting. So anyone who is listening to this, I implore you, if you want to learn about finance, a lot of people know about traditional M&A, but not a lot of them know about pipes, and you can learn a little bit about them because there's a presentation on the Superior Plus website about it. But basically what the transaction entailed was an investment in this business, and there was like a number of considerations, because when you invest in a company and you have a minority position, especially if the company is still public, there's a lot of control and governance issues that you run into, liquidity scenarios, like all these different things. And so we had to negotiate, you know, like board rights, you know, whether or not like Brookfield would get like say in the board, which allows them to have like more control, like all these different things, which I found like really, really interesting. It was probably one of the most complex transactions I've ever worked on. And I think it was really good experience that I got that in the summer. And since then we've worked on, you know, 5 or 6 that are very, very similar, and they're super complicated, really, really highly negotiated transactions. And the coolest thing about those types of deals is you really see kind of like your seniors, the people like your managing directors and their counsel and things like that. You see them earn their money because there's a lot of negotiation. Like it's not a vanilla, company A sells to company Y. This is one of those scenarios where the banker really earns the fee. And so, yeah, that transaction specifically was really interesting for sure.
Thank you. And what does the timeline look like in terms of closing deals?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's one that like a lot of people want to know. The answer is that it depends on the type of transaction. The typical M&A process will take, call it like 6 to 9 months, but we always that's a typical process. You can run a process in 3 months, which is crazy. You can run a process in a year and a half. It really just depends on a lot of process timeline is driven by the objectives of the company that you're advising. So if you're advising, like hypothetically, right, if we made up this company that has it's a public company and the founder wants to, or let's say all the shareholders want to sell, they're tired of being in the stock and there's an obvious buyer that just wants to absorb the whole company, then, their objective there is to monetize their stake. And if if they're willing to be patient to get the best offer, then we'd probably run a process, closer to call it 9 months. But oftentimes in banking, what happens is there's a specific need. So a company either needs capital now because they're running out of money, or there's a founder that desperately needs to get out of the business. And what that kind of serves to do usually in our business is to accelerate the timeline quite a bit. And from that perspective, we have to get quite aggressive on how we market the company and how we position it for whatever objective it's looking to meet. But I'd say typically in M&A, it's 6 to 9 months. Typically IPO process can be, as short as 4 months. Any other financing initiative can be intra 4 months. It really just depends. There's usually a ton of delays in company processes, especially when you're working with public companies. So, obviously if you're doing a public M&A deal, halfway through the transaction, the company could, just report terrible earnings or something like that could kill the stock price, right? It's the public companies are like a living beast and things can change any day. So it's hard to give a firm timeline. I've worked on transactions that are still from my Valitas days that are still not closed, right? So I think usually though, if you were to say the perfect process is probably just an M&A deal is 6 to 9 months. Perfect.
And what is one of the biggest challenges you have faced and how did you overcome it?
Professionally or personally or both or
whichever one you prefer. We prefer professional or personal, up to you.
There's been a couple professional challenges that I've had in terms of just really, really tight timelines or really, really stressful moments. I think like I mentioned, at my time at Valitas, when I was talking about that transaction for that food and beverage business, we were on a huge timeline. We had a week to get together a full merger model with a full board presentation recommending everything. So we had to recommend the purchase price for the company. We had to recommend how to finance it. So what % debt, what % stock, what % cash, and the relative impacts of all of them. We had to talk about the strategic rationale. We had to model out the pro forma business. So just show, over the next 8 quarters how it performed, and then 2 years down, 3 years down, 4 years down, all these different things. And I think that was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, because at that time I had not built a full integrated 3-statement merger model, and to kind of get your first one when you have 1 week, it was pretty insane. And I actually got put into that transaction because one of the other kind of more senior people on the file actually ended up not being able to do it. Basically, kind of we had a bit of a staffing crisis, and the people that were originally staffed on the project weren't able to fully kind of get it done in the timeline. And so I was kind of brought into the transaction along with one of the other analysts that I work with, and her and I just really we looked at each other and we're holy, this is going to be a huge grind. We have no idea what we're doing, but we kind of, we had a plan. We had belief in ourselves that we could figure it out. We had good resources. So thank you to the Marquee Group for that, because we definitely had their merger model up on the screen when I was building it. And we just committed to a timeline. We just said, we're just going to stay here as long as it takes to get this done. And we came in, I think that was the longest I've ever worked in my life. I think we were getting into the office at 8 o'clock in the morning. We were leaving at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was insane. Yeah. and kudos to her. Her name was Shelby. She definitely carried me through some of those late nights when I would get grumpy and stuff like that. So if she's listening, definitely appreciate that. But yeah, like we worked really hard, but ultimately what happened was we were able to produce a really good product, and we learned a ton we were working one-on-one with our managing director, and you know, he had done $60 billion plus of transactions career. So to kind of get experience on your first like big model from someone who's so experienced was invaluable. And I think honestly that's like what, in that week, I probably learned more than I ever had in my entire life, and that's kind of set me up for the rest of my career, because after that I came out of it. Actually, I'll finish the story by saying that we were able to produce the product. We showed it to the client. The client absolutely loved it, and we delivered actually the presentation in the board meeting, me, Shelby, and our MDs. And it was an incredible experience to be in a public company board meeting after grinding for the whole week, and just kind of like being exposed to all those different things. It taught me so much. And then after that, I basically felt, you know, very, very comfortable with anything technical. And I think that really kind of set the foundation for me to have a lot of success in the industry, just by being kind of like, they call it like a baptism by fire, right? Like just, I had to learn it all. I had no choice. So it was probably the most challenging, but I'd say definitely the most rewarding I think it was about a week or 2 weeks, call it.
Definitely. How can students develop skills related to this industry from an early age?
That's a good question. I think I'm going to struggle with answering this one. And the reason is because I don't necessarily think that you need to be thinking about business your whole life to be successful in business. I think what's really important is to teach people to be critical, innovative, creative thinkers from an early age, but not necessarily to always think about money or numbers or margins or financial modeling or whatever it is. I think like for me, like my parents did a really good job sort of like probing me to be critical when I was young. Like never kind of take what you read at face value, like always dig deeper, always look for the truth, basically to develop intellectual curiosity. I think like young people should look to be intellectually curious. Like you should never really be settled with saying, I don't know, or I don't understand. Like it's fine not to know, and it's fine not to understand. Like we're not going to know everything, right? But the point being is to kind of like always strive to gain that knowledge. I think that is the skill that will carry you in any career, really, not just in finance. I think intellectual curiosity is what separates average analysts from the best analysts, or average bankers from the best bankers. And I think that's it's a skill you can learn for sure, but it definitely comes from an early age. Like for me, if I look back on why I'm so intellectually curious, it's because I think my dad and my mom like really pushed me from a young age just to always kind of like go the extra mile, always dig deeper. Another thing too, I'd say outside of intellectual curiosity is just creativity, and I'm always coming back to this concept of uniqueness. Like don't be afraid to kind of go outside the herd. So I guess you could teach young people this. It's like if all your friends are doing Y, don't be afraid to do X, right? Like I think all those things are important, and then yeah, like maybe just like math and stuff like that. But really, like you should be learning math anyway, no matter what, right? I think it's like the intellectual curiosity is really the core skill there, and then work ethic for sure. Like obviously, work ethic can come in a variety of ways. It can be school, it can be extracurricular, or it can be sports, it can be extracurriculars, it can be anything really. I think it's important for kids that have a lot of time on their hands to occupy their time with things that are productive. For me, it was high level athletics. And I think for other people, it could be anything. It could be dance, it could be music, whatever. I think it's that competitive nature though, to strive to be excellent at something. It's an important skill to learn. And that's definitely, if you're able to kind of do that and couple that with intellectual curiosity, you'll be a rock star, you'll be fine.
Thank you. And what skills do investment banks look for in students? And how can applicants differentiate themselves to hold a competitive edge?
Yeah, I mean that's the multi-million-dollar question. That's what they say, right? I mean, I'll give my take on it. I think, like and I'm sure whoever's listening has heard me talk a lot about a lot of these things, and there's going to be a little bit of overlap. So I apologize if I'm kind of saying the same thing over and over again. But I think like the skills we look for are no different than the skills I just described. We definitely look for someone. I'd say like the ideal candidate is someone obviously who checks all the normal boxes, so has like good grades, good extracurriculars, good work experience. But even to the extent that you don't have all those, or you have a combination of those, I think like just generally the personality traits we look for are someone who's a team player, like who can sit in the room and kind of work with a team, someone who has a good work ethic, but more importantly, someone with a really good attitude. So someone who can kind of get crushed till 4 or 5 in the morning, come in the office the next day at 8 and still have a smile on their face. I think that goes a long way. And then, like I said, the biggest like intellectual component of this would be that intellectual curiosity piece and the attention to detail. So being curious enough to make sure you're getting the answers and having the attention to detail to make sure the answers are right. I think those are the important things that we look for. In terms of how to like stand out in the process and be unique. I mean, I talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to go into it a little bit deeper here. And I think a lot of it, like one of the decisions that I made, we talked a little bit about what my best decision was. And I think honestly, it was all part of the same theme. I decided kind of like to figure out what my edge was, to how to market myself as a unique candidate by doing a lot of introspective thinking. And I think that's really important. Like, I think anyone who's listening to this who's a student that wants to be an investment banker or go into any high finance field, with the level of competition in today's market, I think it's really, really important to understand yourself first and foremost so that you can package yourself in a way that's going to be unique. Like, a lot of people say, how do I be unique? But they don't even know who they are. So I can't tell you how to be unique if you don't know who you are yet, right? So you got to look at yourself really, really critically with a really, really critical lens, and you say, okay, what am I good at? What am I bad at? What could I improve on? And what you need to do is identify what you do better than almost like, what is your skill that you do better, like you're in the top 1% at? And if you're not, then that's, not your skill, and don't market yourself around that. And everything that you think you're weak at, just work rigorously to improve. And so like what I did was I felt, there were certain things that I was much, much better than other people at. And there was other things that I was terrible at that a lot of people were really good at. One of my weaknesses that stands out to me was accounting. Like, I was atrocious at accounting when I started, terrible. And it's like one of the core skills you need to be good at this. Mm-hmm. So I just spent a ton of time, like literally so much time reading accounting, trying to do problems. Like, I had a mentor, and he was a great accountant, which worked well for me. So I just got him to send me problems all the time, and he would answer, show me where I went wrong and all these different things, to the point now where I feel like I'm one of the better people at my level at accounting. And that all comes from just working ruthlessly to get better. And then, like in terms of the uniqueness, I just felt like, for me, like I'm good in the room, I'm pretty genuine, and I'm very, very good at thinking on my feet. And I kind of just revolve myself around that. And I have a deep rooted passion to learn. And I don't think a lot of people were willing to go to the lengths that I was to prove that. And I was right, because people weren't. Like they would ask you, like, oh, you love to learn, so what do you do to learn? And I would say, yeah, like I read 5-6 books a month. And then they ask you about what book you want to read, and I would mention, like I read War and Peace by Tolstoy, or I'm reading like a historical novel or whatever it is. And people are interested in that. Like, they don't want to hear like, oh, like I read Ben Graham's The Value Investor, or some like very traditional finance book, right? Like, when you're giving them like really interesting answers, they're going to remember those. And I think like a combination of all those things allowed me to be unique. But what I did to be unique is not going to be the same as other people, right? Like, what I employ you to do is the process, is to look inside yourself and say, what am I good at? What am I bad at? And the things that you're bad at, just get better at them, and just work hard every day to get a little bit better at them. And the things that you're good at, try and tailor a lot of your answers and a lot of your package around them. So I've seen some people in the past do that. They're really good people, right? Like, they're really good like team players, like and they'll prove that by, showing that they were like captains on teams or whatever. Or they'll say, what you don't want to do, though, it's easier to say what I wouldn't do rather than I would do, right? Because it all depends, like what I would do depends on the person. But what I wouldn't do is say like, oh, I work the hardest. Like, no, you don't. Like, nobody does. Like, we all work hard, right? But to say that, like, I have the best work ethic out of everybody is crazy, because some of the lengths that people are willing to do are pretty nuts. So just make sure that you're looking at yourself with an honest lens, right? And I think that's the important stuff. And when you do that, the answer will become really, really obvious of what you should do to be unique.
That was really helpful. Last but not least, what is the difference between investment banking and private equity?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll answer it by saying they're similar and they coexist essentially, but they are different roles. So investment banking is basically the broker between a company's corporate activities. So if a company wants to buy another company, or it wants to raise money, capital in any way, whether it's debt or equity, or investment bank to advise them. So we're advisors. We don't actually do anything per se. Like, we won't theoretically, like, we're not in the company, so we don't actually raise the money for them, but we'll go out and we'll market them. And we're basically, if you think about it like real estate, we're like the real estate agent. Private equity is kind of like the real estate developer. Like, they'll develop an area. In private equity firms, they will buy the companies and operate them. So oftentimes investment banks and private equity professionals, they get confused with each other because we usually work as part of the same transaction. But we will theoretically, right? Like what my group does is we sell businesses to private equity firms. So the private equity firm will buy the company, will try and make it better, hold it for a period of time, and then ultimately sell it for a profit so that they can return those profits to their investors. The investment banker will just be involved in sort of the selling of the company or the acquisition of the company and any sort of like interaction that happens along the way. The best way to really understand it for those who are listening that aren't like financial professionals or don't have like a really good knowledge of finance would be, it's basically like a real estate agent and a real estate developer. Like a real estate agent, you're going to like basically like help somebody buy a home or help someone sell a home, right? Whereas like a real estate developer, they might buy multiple homes to develop like an area or something like that, right? If you think about commercial real estate, there's a commercial real estate agent that helps sort of sell the property, and then there's a commercial real estate developer that will actually like build a skyscraper or something, right? So those are the differences. I'd say us as bankers are more similar to the real estate agent, and the private equity professionals will be more similar to the developers. But basically, like banking, you can think of it as an advisory brokerage business. It's definitely the middleman, whereas like the private equity business at its core is an investment role. So you're it's what we call the buy side. They're actually buying the companies and trying to make them better.
And Mr. Tuszynski, that's the end of our interview. Thank you so much for coming.
No problem.
I learned so much from you, and this really changed me into my own career pathway, how I'm going to implement it in the future. And thank you so much. And before we left off, I would just like to say that the wide range of achievements behind you is truly incredible, as I can see.
Yeah, a lot of those are like sport medals. But yeah, I get made fun of a lot. It's I guess I should probably move them. It makes it seem like I'm
They're
gloating.
great.
I
They're
appreciate it
fantastic.
anyway. I appreciate it either way. Well, no, go ahead.
Yes, do you have any final thoughts?
No, like all I'll say is for anyone who's interested in getting into banking, I know that it's definitely a daunting career path. There's a lot of people think it's more complicated than it is, but you know, all I'll say is it's much simpler than you think. It's not as daunting once you start, and all you got to do is start talking to people in the industry, start getting a better feel for it, believe in yourself, and work as hard as you can, and ultimately I think you can get any role. Nothing is unachievable. So and also, you know, I welcome anyone who wants to get more detailed insight can definitely drop me a line on LinkedIn, and we can see if we can have a coffee chat. But yeah, no, listen, pleasure to be here. I'm really, you know, thankful that I have the opportunity to kind of share some experiences. Hopefully it helps some people in their career development or in their career decisions. And yeah, just humbled to be here.
Thank you. I myself was considering investment banking, and now my future is very clear in front of me. So thank you for that. And have a great evening.
Anytime. Yeah, you as well. Take care.
Bye.